Hey guys, this genre is back for another in-depth Slay the Spire discussion. We're going to talk about the relic Dead Branch today. Dead Branch is a relic that I shied away from for a long time. I am ashamed to say this, but I have even had a run where I didn't put Dead Branch in my deck when I was offered it. Whenever you exhaust a card, you add a random card to your hand, and that's what Dead Branch does, and for the rest of the fight, that random card that you've added to your hand is going to be in your deck, unless you exhaust that one too. And, I mean, if you do, you'll get a different one. The Dead Branch takes away this thing where you're exhausting cards and they're removed from your deck, and replaces it with a thing where when you exhaust a card, it creates a new random card and puts it in your deck. And there are basically two sort of lines of thought that you can approach this with. And the first is, if I'm putting random cards into my deck, that makes my deck less consistent. I built my deck to do a very specific thing, and it's a strong thing, and I want it to continue being able to do that strong thing. And so Dead Branch, isn't particularly strong. It might even be actively detrimental to my deck. And that can absolutely be true. If you've built, say, a one-turn kill deck that's reliant on playing a few adrenalines to get going, and then it just has an infinite cycle or something, you want those adrenalines that you played to exhaust themselves and get out of the way. You don't want them to be replaced with, just random cards that you now have to work around to win the game. So yeah, that is true to an extent, and I understand that line of thinking and all that stuff. The other line of thinking about Dead Branch is like, holy fuck, you're giving me 20 free cards in a combat? That's the other line of thinking, and I think that one's considerably more compelling when you take a step back from it and look at it. So when I play Cloak and Dagger Plus, Cloak and Dagger makes me 6 block, and Dead Branch is more of a silent card than an Ironclad card in my opinion. Cloak and Dagger Plus gains me 6 block and adds 2 shivs to my hand, so it gains me 6 block and deals 8 damage. Pretty good card. It's also drawing me 2 cards. Backflip. Okay, Backflip is the strongest Ironclad common, I think. I think a lot of people would agree on that. It's insanely powerful. Maybe something like Flying Knee or Slice even is stronger in Act 1, but Backflip is like a card that you build entire decks around because of how insanely strong this is. Drawing 2 cards, gaining 5 block. You're telling me that my Cloak and Dagger is now a Backflip and it deals 8 damage? As well? I have a Backflip in my deck and it deals 8 damage for 1 energy? So this is insanely strong. And concerns about the cards that you get being bad cards don't really work very well in this game for 2 reasons. Reason 1, in most fights, in most decks that you play, you don't really get through your deck more than once. Even if you draft a pretty, cultivated, synced up deck, it's still going to probably have 20 cards in it, and it's going to take you probably 3 turns before you reshuffle that deck. And so these extra cards that you're putting in your hand get put in your discard pile, and they have to get into your draw pile, and then you have to draw them again. At that point, in most fights, stuff's already winding down, probably. Might not be the case for super late boss fights, but even those, turn 8 is pretty commonly when I'm killing bosses, even on Ascension 15, where they have, higher hit point totals and stuff. And so you're just... in my experience, I'm just not getting through the deck enough for the bloat from these cards to matter all that much, and it doesn't matter at all for the first 3 or 4 turns, which are generally the most important turns in combat. And the second thing is there aren't really bad cards in this game. Like, the concern is that we're adding a ton of bad cards, but what bad cards exactly? The cards are generally well balanced. They're well balanced enough that even the weakest cards, like Deadly Poison is a pretty weak card, even that does 10 damage for 1 energy, and that's if you're not using poison for anything else. The cards in here just aren't that bad, and something like Underhand Strike, this can be a very bad card in a deck that doesn't have access to any way to discard things, right? But one, if you're drawing a ton of extra cards a turn because you're exhausting stuff and that draws you cards now, it doesn't really matter if you have one bad card in your hand. Sure, whatever. And two, we're getting another 5 cards every turn or whatever. So one of those is probably going to let you discard. That's just how it works. It just works. Some of the cards, beyond not being that bad, are insane. Some of them are like Backstab. This costs 0 energy and deals 11 damage and then draws you another card. So like, I play my Cloak and Dagger, I play one of the shivs, it exhausts, I get a Backstab. I deal another 11 damage and I get another new card. Some of them are powers. Powers are cards which, when played, they go away for the rest of the fight, and these don't exhaust. They're like put in play forever, so they don't replace themselves with a new card, unfortunately. But this has a constant effect for the rest of the fight. So if you're worried about what your deck is going to look like on turn 6, 7, 8, well, it's going to have like an extra 3 powers in play over what you'd usually have. I feel like that forgives a lot of clutter pretty comfortably. Some of the powers are absolutely insane. Sometimes you get adrenaline. So, like, yeah. Dead Branch is very, very strong. Perhaps the strongest thing you can do with Dead Branch is Storm of Steel. So, like, you draw your 5 cards for the turn. Very good. You play, like, a Cloak and Dagger plus. Now you have 6 cards, and you've dealt, like, 25 damage, and you have a bunch of block. And then you play your Storm of Steel, you discard your hand, and you play all your new shivs. And that deals a ton of damage, and then you have a new hand. And you play, like, the best 2 cards in that hand, and then you're done. So, Dead Branch is insane on Silent, because cards like Cloak and Dagger exist, which give you very, very, very available exhaust. Also because Silent has more access to card draw, I would say, so if you do bloat your deck, it doesn't matter quite as much. Dead Branch is very, 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 very strong on Ironclad in conjunction with Corruption. If you get Corruption in Dead Branch, you'll win the run accidentally, basically. You don't need a deck that does anything at that point. You just have to have some skills in it. Note that if you end up with only attacks in your hand, those aren't going to exhaust anymore, so you might end up with, like, only attacks in your deck. You have to watch out for that. But, you know, be careful about it. Use Burning Pact to exhaust an attack, not a skill. Try to keep it so that you're playing lots of stuff all the time. So, this Corruption Dead Branch combo is incredibly strong in Ironclad. I haven't lost a run on Ironclad where I had Dead Branch in my deck either, but I think that the Relic is less impactful on Ironclad than it is on Silent. You have lots of cards like True Grit and Havoc, and if you guys have been sleeping on this, there's a very, very, very strong block creation engine for Ironclad, which centers around cards like Havoc and True Grit and the uncommon Feel No Pain. Whenever a card is exhausted, gain 4 block. The availability of exhaust in Ironclad is sort of comparable to the availability of discard in Silent. And if you think about how strong Tough Bandages are for Silent, Tough Bandages being the... I wish I could sort these. Whoops. Tough Bandages being whenever you discard a card during your turn, gain 3 block. This is one of the top 5 relics for Silent, I would say. I think a lot of people think that too, just because there are a few Silent cards which discard a ton of stuff, and a few other Silent cards that like discard one thing, and that's enough for it to make incredibly large amounts of block. yeah, so Feel No Pain, instead of 3 block, you're making 4, and this is an uncommon power. You can have, like, more than one of them. It's way more common to see than Tough Bandages. And there really is a lot of exhaust. This exhausts, this exhausts, this exhausts. This exhausts. Shall I go through all of them and click on the ones that exhaust for you? Fiend Fire exhausts your entire hand. There's a Dark Embrace if you want that deck to have a draw engine to go with its block creation. Now all of a sudden you're drawing a ton of cards. There's a... where'd it go? Corruption. Corruption ensures that your skills exhaust on their own. So you might not want to play Corruption the first time through the deck because you're actually going to exhaust your entire deck, which might not be great, but, you know, just hold it. Second time through the deck, hey, let's play a Corruption. Now we're making 60 block per turn. Yeah, so exhaust is a very available thing on Ironclad. I have not found Dead Branch to be quite as insane on Ironclad, maybe because Ironclad just has more sort of, I don't know, some of the Ironclad cards are just like, this deals some damage to something, and I feel like that's a little bit more common for Ironclad than it is for Silent. I don't know exactly what it is, but for whatever reason, the Dead Branch feels strongest on Silent. It feels strong on Ironclad to me, but not quite as insane. And I think if you're sleeping on Dead Branch, you really shouldn't be. If you care about winning as often as possible, Dead Branch is a relic that is just incredibly strong and something you should be using to do that. All right. I've been Joe on Rips. Hope you enjoyed this talk about Dead Branch, and I'll see you tomorrow. Let me know what you thought in the comments if you have any thoughts about Dead Branch that you want to share. There's always stuff that I didn't say. I may have misspoke. Who knows? I would love to hear about it. Bye, guys.